Every Texan woman I grew up around had at least 5 of these dump-it-and-walk-away crock-pot dinners memorized cold, no recipe card, no measuring, and every single one of them ran on 5 ingredients or fewer. Not 5 ingredients, counting salt and pepper as loopholes either. 5 real ingredients, dumped into a crock-pot before church or before a shift at work, and dinner's just there waiting when everybody gets home. By the end of this, you'll know the actual technique behind why 5 ingredients is the real ceiling for a dump-and-go dinner that still tastes composed, 6 full recipes built on that principle, and the one mistake that turns a 5-ingredient dinner into a watery, bland disappointment instead of something that tastes like somebody actually cooked it. Let's start with why 5 ingredients specifically, because that number isn't arbitrary the way a lot of recipe roundups treat it. A crock-pot dinner that works has to hit 4 things at once. A protein, something starchy or substantial to build the meal around. A liquid or sauce base that does the actual flavor work over those long hours. And one ingredient that adds acidity, heat, or brightness, so the whole thing doesn't taste flat and one note by the time it's done cooking. That's 4 categories, and the 5th ingredient is almost always a seasoning blend or an aromatic that ties the first 4 together. Go below 5 and you're usually missing one of those categories entirely, which is exactly why a lot of 3-ingredient crock-pot recipes online taste thin and unfinished. Go above 5 and you're not really simplifying anymore, you're just writing a regular recipe and calling it minimalist. 5 is genuinely the floor for a dump-and-go dinner that still tastes like somebody put thought into it. Let's get into the actual recipes, because understanding the category structure is what lets you build your own once you've seen how these 6 work. The first one, and honestly the one I make most often, is what my own mother called Sunday chicken. Bone-in chicken thighs, a jar of salsa, a packet of taco seasoning, a can of black beans drained, and a bag of frozen corn. Dump it all in, 6 to 8 hours on low, and you shred the chicken right in the pot at the end, stirring everything together into something that works over rice, in a tortilla, or straight out of a bowl with a spoon. The salsa's doing double duty here. It's your liquid base and your acidity in one ingredient, which is exactly the kind of overlap that makes a 5-ingredient dinner actually work instead of feeling incomplete. The second one is a pot roast built around 3 ingredients most people already assume they need a dozen for. A chuck roast, a packet of dry onion soup mix, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce, with a bag of baby potatoes and carrots thrown in around the roast itself. 8 to 10 hours on low, and that dry soup mix is carrying an enormous amount of seasoning work on its own. Onion, garlic, and salt, already balanced out by whoever formulated it, which is exactly why this one's been a Texas kitchen staple for decades longer than crock-pot cooking's been trendy online. The third one leans into genuine Tex-Mex territory. A pound of ground beef, browned first if you've got 5 extra minutes, or raw if you genuinely don't, a can of Rotel, a can of pinto beans drained, a packet of chili seasoning, and a cup of beef broth. 6 hours on low gets you a chili that tastes like it simmered on a stovetop all afternoon, and the Rotel's doing the same double duty the salsa did in the first recipe tomato base, and a real kick of heat and acidity in one single can. The fourth one is built around pork instead of beef or chicken, and it's the one that surprises people most with how little effort it actually takes. A pork shoulder or pork butt, a bottle of root beer, a bottle of your favorite barbecue sauce, and salt and pepper on the meat before it goes in. That's it. That's the whole ingredient list. 8 hours on low, shred it right in the pot once it's done, and the root beer's doing something specific here worth understanding. The sugar and acidity in it break down the pork's connective tissue over that long cook time almost the same way a proper brine would, and it adds a subtle sweetness that plays against the tang in whatever barbecue sauce you're using without ever tasting like soda was involved at all. The fifth one is a white chicken chili that a lot of people don't realize fits the 5-ingredient rule until they actually count it out. Boneless chicken breasts or thighs, a jar of salsa verde, a can of white beans drained, a block of cream cheese, and a packet of ranch seasoning. 6 hours on low, shred the chicken, stir the cream cheese through at the end until it melts into the whole pot, and you get something considerably richer and more complex tasting than 5 ingredients has any right to produce. The sixth one is the simplest of the group and the one I'd actually recommend starting with if you've never tried this style of cooking before. Smoked sausage, sliced, a bag of frozen green beans, a bag of baby potatoes, a stick of butter, and a seasoning blend, Cajun or a simple garlic and onion blend depending on what direction you want it leaning. 4 to 5 hours on low. Since sausage and potatoes don't need the same long cook time a tougher cut of beef or pork shoulder does, and that butter melting through everything over those hours is doing more flavor work than people expect from a single ingredient sitting quietly in the bottom of the pot. Now let's talk about why these actually work, because understanding the mechanism behind each one is what lets you build your own 5-ingredient dinner instead of just following these exact 6 forever. Every one of these 6 recipes has exactly one ingredient doing double or triple duty, and identifying that ingredient is the actual skill here. The salsa in the first recipe is liquid, acid, and aromatic seasoning combined. The dry soup mix in the pot roast is your entire seasoning blend in one packet. The rotel in the chili is tomato base plus heat plus acidity. The root beer in the pork is tenderizer plus sweetness plus part of your liquid base. The ranch seasoning in the white chicken chili is your entire aromatic and herb profile in one packet. The butter in the sausage and potato dish is fat, richness, and a carrier for whatever seasoning blend you're using all at once. Find that one overlapping ingredient in whatever you're trying to build, and the other 4 slots become obvious once you know what categories they need to fill. Let's talk about the Crockpot itself for a minute, because equipment habits matter more here than people expect going into this. Low and slow is genuinely the default setting you want for almost everything on this list. 6 to 10 hours depending on the protein, rather than reaching for high to save time. High heat on a Crockpot cooks faster, but it's considerably less forgiving of timing. And part of the entire appeal of dump and go cooking is walking away for a full workday without needing to be precise about exactly when it finishes. Low heat gives you that margin. A pot roast that's done at 8 hours on low is usually still perfectly fine at 9 or even 10, where the same roast on high can go from perfect to overdone in a much narrower window you're not around to catch. Resist lifting the lid to check on things partway through. The same principle that applies to a smoker running low and slow outdoors. Every time that lid comes off, you're losing heat and adding time to the total cook. And a Crockpot that's been opened and closed repeatedly through the day is working against the exact walk-away convenience. That's the whole point of cooking this way in the first place. Now let's get into the mistake that actually ruins most homemade attempts at this style of cooking, because it's the one detail that separates a genuinely good 5-ingredient dinner from a watery, bland one. Adding too much extra liquid because it feels like the safe move, worrying the dish will dry out over all those hours, is the single most common way people sabotage an otherwise solid 5-ingredient recipe. A Crockpot is a sealed, low evaporation environment. Nothing's escaping the way it would in an open pot on a stovetop, which means whatever liquid you start with is essentially the same amount you end with, plus whatever additional moisture releases from the meat and vegetables themselves as they cook down. Add a full cup of extra broth on top of a recipe that's already got a jar of salsa or a can of soup providing plenty of liquid, and you end up with something soupy and diluted instead of rich and cohesive, because that flavor's now spread across considerably more liquid than the recipe was actually built around. Trust the recipe's stated liquid amount, and if anything, lean slightly under rather than over if you're building your own version, since it's far easier to thin something out with a splash more liquid at the very end than it is to fix a dish that's already watered down after 8 hours of cooking. Let's cover a couple of more mistakes worth knowing before you start building your own versions of these. Skipping the browning step on ground beef when you genuinely have 5 extra minutes for it makes a real difference in the finished texture, even though raw ground beef technically cooks through fine in a crock pot on its own. Browned meat develops real flavor through the Maillard reaction before it ever goes in the pot, where raw ground beef added directly tends to come out slightly grayer and less developed in flavor by comparison, even after a full afternoon of cooking. Using pre-shredded cheese instead of a block if a recipe calls for cheese stirred in at the end is a smaller mistake but a real one. Pre-shredded cheese carries an anti-caking coating that keeps it from melting as smoothly into a sauce, where cheese shredded fresh off a block melts considerably more evenly into whatever you're stirring it through. A few questions people ask me regularly about this style of cooking. What if you don't have a slow cooker large enough for some of these bigger cuts like a full pork shoulder or chuck roast? Cut the protein down to fit whatever size crock pot you've actually got, rather than assuming you need to upgrade equipment first, since a smaller cut of the same meat cooks through in roughly the same time frame, just yielding fewer total servings than the recipe as written. What if you want to prep these the night before instead of the morning of? Most of these hold up fine assembled the night before and refrigerated in the crock pot insert overnight, then set to cook first thing in the morning, though double check your specific crockpot's manual, since some models specifically warn against putting a cold insert straight from the fridge into a hot base without letting it come closer to room temperature first. What if you want to make one of these dairy-free, specifically the white chicken chili with cream cheese? A dairy-free cream cheese alternative works reasonably well as a direct swap, stirred in at the same point at the end of cooking, though expect a slightly different, somewhat less rich final texture than the dairy version produces. What if you're cooking for just 1 or 2 people and these portions are too large? All 6 of these freeze well after cooking, portioned into individual containers, which means cooking the full recipe and freezing half is often a better use of a crockpot's time than trying to scale a recipe down small enough to only feed 1 or 2 people in a single sitting. That's genuinely the whole method, start to finish, recipes and mistakes included. 5 ingredients, with one of them always doing double or triple duty, covering multiple flavor categories at once. Low and slow instead of high and fast, the lid staying shut the whole time it's cooking, and trusting the stated liquid amount instead of padding it out of nervousness. 6 dinners, 5 ingredients each, dumped in before you leave the house and done by the time everybody's home and hungry. Pick whichever one sounds best to your own family tonight, dump it in before you walk out the door this morning, and see how little effort an actual composed dinner can take.